Hi, I'm Missy with On William Street, and we are here to help you become a more confident quilter, from the piecing to the quilting and everything in between. And this week we are working on block 12 of our online Quilting Bee Skill Builder. So this block is our foundation paper piece block. So it's the perfect block to end with because you can go ahead and use up all of the scraps from your previous blocks. And we will have templates. You'll need to go into the blog post to print out those templates, and you're going to need to have 4 sets of each template. And because these are 18-inch square blocks, we do have to piece some of the templates together. So you'll need to tape or glue, whichever you prefer. We actually glue them just because it is paper piecing, so that tape might be a little difficult removing the paper off with the stitching. So doing just a little bit of glue, making sure your glue is dry though before you actually start your sewing so you don't gum up your machine. So with our templates, the one thing that we want to keep in mind with paper piecing is what we're seeing here. This is going to be the back of the block. So all of our seams, once we're complete, are going to be underneath, in between the paper and the fabric. So when we're putting our fabric on, especially if we're using prints, it's not as big of a deal if we're using solids, but you want to make sure your prints are right side up. Otherwise, your prints are going to be on the inside of your block. So with paper piecing, we want to make sure we find our numbers on our template. So we've got 1 and 2 here. So we want to pull the colors that we need for that. And 1 is going to be our dark green and 2 is going to be our white. So the first thing we want to do is we want to make sure we've got a big enough piece for our dark green to lay over. If you have a light box, that's great to put these over to make sure that you're covering your pieces. If you don't, you can also just kind of hold it up in the light. Make sure that you've got that piece completely covered. And then what we like to do is we come over and we are going to fold our paper piece in between those two. So right there on the line. And then we're going to take our ruler and our rotary cutter, and we're going to cut our 1/4 of an inch seam right here along the edge of that paper. Now that we've got this folded over, we can see how much we need for that B portion. So we're going to grab some of our white. Just lay it right there on top, just make sure that that's covering everything. Then you're going to want to pick this up so you don't lose that 1/4 of an inch seam. Place it over there, and then again you can just double check to make sure your white's completely covering everything that is following this line. And then I like to stick a pin in it, and then we will go ahead and we will sew directly on this line to attach those 2 pieces. Now we've got our stitch in here, and we did shorten our stitch length. That's just going to help when you remove the paper afterwards with that smaller stitch length. And then you're going to want to fold this over, give it a really nice finger press right here, and then we're going to move on to number 3, and we're going to do the same thing. So we'll fold our paper right there on that line, cut our seam, and then this number 3 piece is going to be dark green as well. So lay that right there on top. We want to make sure that everything in this number 3 is being covered, and with a little bit of extra, because we need to make sure we've got our 1/4 inch seams in those. And then we will sew that in place. And then we are going to just continue that process. After we do 3, we're going to come back and we're going to do 4 and 5, and then we're going to continue that process with the rest of our templates. Now piece 3 is in place. Again, we're going to give that nice finger press there. flip it over, and we're going to come up here and find number 4. And this one, it's a little bit bigger piece. Oh, yep, this will still work. So we just want to make sure that we're covering everything. And one thing when I want to make sure, because I've got this darker fabric underneath and I'm starting to get some layers, I want to make sure this is covering. I just do like a quick flip test, put my finger right there on that cut line, and yep, I got plenty of room, so we are good to go there. Okay, and then we've got section 4, again, nice finger press, and this is one thing I really like about paper piecing, is look at that really nice point right there. That really helps us get those. We can do a lot with paper piecing that it's a little harder when you're doing regular piecing. So fold number 5 over. I've got a little bit of stitch in that, so I'm just gonna flatten that out. Now this piece, for number 5, we want to use yellow for that one. So here is our yellow. We want to make sure that we've got enough space on this side. Yep, we're good. In fact, I'm going to move it over just a little bit so I've got a little more space. And we'll trim this seam allowance right here. We've got a nice flat block, and we're going to cut. Now make sure that when you're cutting your paper piece block out, you are cutting it out along that outside line. So you can actually take your ruler, if you've got, this is really nice, it's just our little 1-inch ruler, and you can put that 1/4 inch line right there on the inside line to make sure that you're not cutting too far, so that you still have your seam allowance when you're sewing the blocks together. And then you'll also want to make sure that you get these little notches at the bottom. The reason these notches are there is just to help reduce bulk in the final block. Okay. Our first section is now complete, so we'll go ahead and repeat this one 3 more times. For our second section, we have 4 pieces that we're going to do in here. So again, we're going to find piece 1, and this one is going to use a white. So we'll grab our white. We want to make sure that it's covering everything in that piece. We'll find the line in between 1 and 2 and fold that in half. Oops. I got that off that line just a little bit. I'm going to refold that. There we go. Okay, make sure my fabric hasn't moved too much on me. I'll cut that 1/4 inch seam. And then this piece number 2 is going to be our light green. Make sure this one's going to be wide enough. Yep. Okay, just make sure we got good coverage there. And then we'll, again, just sew right there on that line. We've got 2 down, we've given it a nice good finger press, and now we're ready to move on to number 3. Now, right here, you do have a lot of extra fabric kind of hanging over here that's attached to that number 4, just so that I don't have that in my way as I'm trying to sew. And what I like to do is go ahead and just fold that line over and just cut that 1/4 of an inch seam allowance right now too, just to get rid of all of that extra green so it's not hanging on me as I'm trying to sew. So section 3 is going to be another white piece. Move those to the side. Okay, stick it right in here, make sure we've got plenty of space. Okay, cut that off just a little bit, make sure. Okay, yeah, we're good. We've got our 3rd piece in here, so again, give it a nice finger press, and we are ready to attach our final piece to this section. So number 4 is going to be a gray, and again, we're just going to get rid of some of this extra bulk of white. Get that out of the way. That little tail off there. We're going to bring in our gray piece. See if this one should be big enough. Yep, we got good coverage on both sides. So we'll sew this on the line, and then we're going to, again, since this is the final piece, give it a nice good press before we come back and trim it. Now we can go ahead and trim this one out. So again, we're going to place that 1/4 of an inch right on top of that inside line. Now this one has more notches on it than our other piece, so you want to make sure that you're getting those little notches on each of the corners cut off. You can leave them straight if you want to, but it's just going to really help reduce the bulk in your seams when we put this entire block together if we cut those off. We have all of our templates complete and cut out. Now we're going to go ahead and remove the paper. Now when removing the paper, there's a couple of tricks that I like to use is one, I start with the last number and tear it off first and fold that in half and just give it a good press. And that's just going to basically almost give you like a little perforated. And then just go ahead and tear that off. And then go to the 3 and give it a good press. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get this block laid out. And remember these ones, these are our corners. And then these are going to go in between each of those corners. So when we're sewing this together, we're going to sew these 2 sections and these 2 sections, and then we're going to sew these 2 sections to each other. So that then when we go to sew the other half, we've got a nice straight line to sew those 2 sides to each other. Now as I'm holding these 2 sections together, I want to make sure that this yellow and this gray are going to line up and those seams are not going to be off. So I'm going to fold it over, make sure that those are lining up nicely, and I'm going to put a pin in there. And then again at the end, the beginning and the end, I'm going to do the same thing. So at the point. That's why we've got those little notches cut off, so just match there at the notches. And then again on this end, we've got notches on one of those pieces. So that's just going to match right up there. And that's just going to help us with our precision as we're sewing these together. Now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take these two sections, we're going to sew them to each other in these two sections. So again, we want to make sure that our gray and our yellow are matching up as close as possible. So we're going to use some pins. Now, kind of a trick on this, if you're worried about having that shift at all on you, you can put one pin on each side of the seam, and that'll just help kind of keep that in place as well if you're a little bit worried about that shifting on you. So one little trick that I want to show you that we've done on ironing these is basically kind of ironing all of them going around, and when we sew those two together, we're going to continue that. Then it just helps kind of reduce some of that bulk right here in the center and keeps your block nice and flat. Now we're ready to pin these final two sections together. So again, we want to make sure that our yellow and our gray are matching up not only on these two edges, but we have the center to deal with as well. But because of the way that we've ironed this, we really can kind of nest our seam right here together, and that's going to help us out in making sure that that lines up really, really well. So we are now complete with block 12. It's our final block, and we are ready to put our quilt together. So watch it for next week. We're going to walk through putting all of these blocks together into one quilt, and then we will be sharing some quilting ideas so that we can get these all finished up. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and click on that bell so that you get notified every time we post a new video.